I never thought a single sentence could erase 68 years of dignity. But there it was, glowing on my phone screen in our family group chat. We need to stop letting that useless old woman think she matters. My hands went cold. The worst part. It wasn't just that my daughter-in-law Brittany wrote it. It was that my son Daniel had already seen it and said nothing. I stared at the message, my name still quietly sitting in that group, forgotten, overlooked. Just like me. So I didn't reply. I took a screenshot instead. Because in that moment I realized something chilling. That message wasn't a mistake. It was the truth they never meant for me to see. If this story hits close to home, take a second to like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and have you ever been made to feel invisible by your own family? You're not alone. Before that message shattered something inside me, my life looked ordinary. Peaceful, even at least from the outside. I lived in a quiet neighborhood in Asheville, North Carolina, in the same house my late husband Thomas and I had bought over 40 years ago. It wasn't extravagant, but it was filled with memories, Sunday breakfast, Christmas mornings, the echo of laughter that used to belong to a full, happy family. After Thomas passed, the house grew quieter, but I held on to it like an anchor. It was the last place where I still felt like myself. Most days I kept busy. I had learned long ago that idleness invited loneliness, and loneliness had a way of whispering things you didn't want to hear. So I stayed active. I volunteered twice a week at a local church pantry, baked more than I should have, and most importantly, I made myself available to my family, especially to my son Daniel. Daniel lived about 20 minutes away with his wife Brittany and their daughter Lily. On paper, it sounded perfect. Close enough to help, close enough to matter. And I made sure I did. Every weekday afternoon, I picked Lily up from school. She would run into my arms, her little backpack bouncing behind her, her laughter bright and unfiltered in a way that made everything feel worthwhile. We'd stop for a small treat, sometimes nothing extravagant, just a cookie or a scoop of ice cream, and she'd tell me about her day like it was the most important story in the world. "Grandma, you're the best," she'd say, her voice full of a kind of love that felt pure. And I believed it. I helped with homework, made her dinner when Daniel and Brittany were running late, which more often than not they were, and sometimes I stayed until bedtime if they asked. It never felt like a burden. It felt like purpose. Weekends were a little different. That's when I'd go over to their house. I'd bring food, always too much food, because that's how I was raised, and I'd cook while Brittany scrolled through her phone or disappeared into another room under the excuse of catching up on emails. "Mom, you don't have to do all this," Daniel would say sometimes, but there was always a plate in his hand when he said it. "It's nothing," I'd reply with a smile. And I meant it. At least I thought I did. Brittany, on the other hand, had a way about her. To anyone watching, she was polite. Charming, even. She called me Mom, hugged me when I walked in, thanked me for everything I did. "You're a lifesaver," she'd say, her voice sweet, her smile perfectly timed. But there were moments, small ones, that didn't quite fit. Like the way her smile would fade the second she thought I wasn't looking, or the slight tension in her shoulders when I stayed longer than expected, or the way she'd sigh, almost imperceptibly, when I offered to help with something she hadn't asked for. At first I brushed it off. Everyone has off days, I told myself. Not everyone expresses gratitude the same way. I didn't want to be the kind of mother-in-law who looked for problems where there weren't any. So I ignored the feeling. What I didn't ignore, what I couldn't ignore, were the moments when Daniel would ask for help. Not with time, but with money. It started small. "Mom, can you spot us a little this month, just until my next paycheck?" Of course I said yes. Then it became a little more frequent. "Mom, the car needs repairs." It's unexpected. "Mom, Lily's school trip came up." "Mom, we're a little behind on the mortgage this month." Just temporary. Each time I told myself the same thing. This is what family does. We help each other. And each time Daniel promised he'd pay me back. Sometimes he did. Most times he didn't. I kept track, at least loosely. Old habits die hard after decades managing finances at the hospital. Numbers had a way of organizing themselves in my mind, whether I wanted them to or not. I knew, even if I didn't say it out loud, that the total had grown into something significant, but I never brought it up. Because every time I thought about it, I pictured Lily's smile. I heard Daniel's voice as a little boy calling me from the backyard. I remembered the version of my son who used to run to me when he was hurt, who used to trust me completely. I didn't want to turn that into something transactional, so I stayed quiet. Brittany, though, she never asked directly. Not at first. Instead, she'd hint. "It must be nice to have everything paid off," she said once, glancing around my house during a visit. "No mortgage, no stress." I smiled politely. "Your time will come." She laughed lightly, but there was something behind it, something sharper than the words themselves. Another time, she mentioned a vacation they'd been wanting to take. "Daniel works so hard," she said almost absent-mindedly. "We just never seem to get ahead enough to actually enjoy it." I knew what she was doing. Or maybe I didn't want to know. Because the next week, when Daniel brought it up, "Mom, we were thinking of taking Lily somewhere special." I offered to help before he even finished the sentence. Looking back now, that might have been the moment something shifted. Not in them, in me. Because every act of generosity, every sacrifice I made was built on a belief that I mattered, that I was seen, that I was appreciated, not just for what I did, but for who I was. And maybe deep down, I was trying to earn something that should have been given freely. Respect, love, a place in my own family that didn't depend on how useful I could be. But the truth has a way of waiting, quietly, patiently, and when it finally reveals itself, it doesn't ask for permission. It just appears cold and undeniable on a glowing phone screen in a message that was never meant for your eyes. That night, after reading Brittany's words over and over again, I sat in my living room long after the sun had set. The house felt different somehow, smaller, emptier, not because anything had changed, but because everything had. I thought about every meal I had cooked, every dollar I had given, every moment I had shown up without being asked. And for the first time, I allowed myself to ask a question I had been avoiding for years. Had any of it ever really mattered to them? Or had I simply been convenient? The silence of that room didn't answer me, but it didn't need to, because somewhere deep inside I already knew, and that was the part that hurt the most. I wish I could tell you that I misunderstood the message, that maybe I'd read it too quickly or taken it out of context or let my emotions fill in gaps that weren't really there. But I didn't. I read every word, slowly, carefully, more than once. And then I read what came after. At first, there was silence in the group chat, a long, uncomfortable pause that stretched for nearly 2 full minutes. I watched the little read indicators appear one by one: Daniel, my daughter Becca, my sister in law Carol, even my cousin Janet. Everyone saw it. No one said anything. Then Brittany sent another message. "I'm serious." She acts like she owns everything just because she helps out a little. A little. I felt something tighten in my chest. Another message followed. "If we don't set boundaries now, we're going to regret it later, especially with the house and everything else." The house. My house. I leaned back slowly in my chair, my fingers still wrapped around my phone like it might slip out of my hands if I loosened my grip even slightly. There it was. Not just resentment, planning, strategy. And then the message that made everything else fall into place. We need to take control before it's too late. Take control. Of what? Of me. Of my life. Of everything I had spent decades building. I didn't realize I had stopped breathing until my chest began to ache. And still, no one responded. Not Daniel. Not Becca. Not a single person stepped in to say, "That's not okay." I think that silence cut deeper than Brittany's words ever could. Because words can be impulsive. Cruel, yes, but sometimes careless, said in frustration. Silence. Silence is deliberate. Silence is agreement dressed up as neutrality. I scrolled up, and that's when I saw it. a thumbs up emoji from Daniel. It was small, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it, but I was. And suddenly, I wasn't just reading a conversation. I was seeing something I had refused to see for a long time. My son didn't just know how Brittany felt, he accepted it. Maybe he even shared it. My throat went dry. I tried to swallow, but it felt like there was something stuck there, something heavy and immovable. I kept reading. Brittany again. I mean, she's helpful, sure. But let's be honest, she's not getting any younger. We have to start thinking ahead, as if I were a problem waiting to happen, as if I were something to be managed, disposed of, replaced. My vision blurred slightly, and I blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall just yet. I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Then came another message, this one from someone I didn't expect. Becca, my daughter. Maybe just talk to her instead of saying this here. It wasn't a defense. It wasn't even support. It was hesitation, a weak attempt to soften something that didn't want to be softened. Brittany responded almost immediately. Relax. She's not even active in this chat. She barely knows how to use her phone. I let out a slow, shaky breath. So that's what they thought. That I was invisible, outdated, irrelevant, too old to notice, too old to matter. I glanced down at my own reflection in the dark screen of my phone, the faint outline of a woman I barely recognized in that moment. Was that how they saw me? A burden wrapped in politeness? A problem disguised as family? Another message popped up. Anyway, I'll talk to Daniel later. We just need to be smart about this. Be smart. The words echoed in my mind. Smart. Calculated. Careful. I looked back at Daniel's name in the chat. Still there? Still silent. No correction. No apology. No defense. Just that small, meaningless thumbs up that now felt like a stamp of approval on everything Brittany had said. I didn't realize I had started shaking until I tried to set my phone down and nearly dropped it. So I held on to it instead. Tighter. Like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. I thought about calling him, demanding an explanation, asking him how he could sit there and let his wife talk about me like that. But something stopped me. Something quiet. Something steady. Because deep down, I already knew what he would say. Mom, it's not like that. You're overreacting. She didn't mean it that way. Excuses, deflections. A gentle way of telling me that my feelings were inconvenient. So I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't confront anyone. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I paid attention. Really paid attention. I opened the chat settings and checked how long I had been in that group. Years. Years of conversations. Photos, plans, jokes. I scrolled back. At first, it was normal. Holiday coordination, birthday reminders, pictures of Lily in her Halloween costume. Then slowly the tone began to shift. Subtle at first. A comment here, a joke there, little remarks that I had brushed off at the time. Allison insists on doing everything her way, lol. You know how she is. Old habits die hard. I remembered reading those messages months ago and smiling, thinking they were harmless, thinking they were affectionate. Now they felt different, like breadcrumbs leading to something I had been too trusting to notice. I kept scrolling, further, deeper, until I reached messages that made my stomach turn. Conversations about me, not with me. About me. If we ever move, we need to make sure she doesn't try to follow. We should start talking about assisted living options at some point. She'll fight it, but we can handle that. We can handle that. As if I were a situation, a complication, a problem to solve. I pressed my lips together, my jaw tightening as something inside me shifted. Not just hurt, not just betrayal. Something sharper, clearer, understanding. Because suddenly everything made sense. The subtle distance, the forced smiles, the carefully worded conversations about the future. It wasn't concern. It wasn't care. It was preparation. And I had been right in the middle of it the entire time. Without even realizing it, A strange calm settled over me then. Not peace? No. This was something else, something colder, more controlled. Because pain, when it reaches a certain point, stops being loud. It becomes quiet, focused, purposeful. I opened my camera roll, took a screenshot of the entire conversation, then another and another. Every message, every word, every piece of evidence that showed exactly how they saw me. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I moved slowly, deliberately, as if I were handling something fragile, even though what I was really holding on to was the truth. When I was done, I locked my phone and placed it gently on the table beside me. The house was silent again, but it didn't feel empty this time. It felt different, like something had shifted inside me, like a door had quietly closed, and another had just begun to open. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as I let out a long, steady breath. For years, I had given without question, loved without condition, trusted without hesitation. And now, for the first time, I was seeing what that had cost me. Not just money, not just time, but something far more valuable: my place in my own family. I closed my eyes, and in the stillness of that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. I wasn't going to argue, or beg, or try to prove my worth to people who had already decided it didn't exist. No. If they wanted to be smart about this, then so would I. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I couldn't, but because I chose not to. Sleep felt like surrender, and I had done enough surrendering for one lifetime. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that had long gone cold, my phone resting in front of me like a quiet witness to everything I had just learned. The glow of the screen had faded, but the words were still there, etched into my mind with a clarity I couldn't escape. Useless old woman. I repeated it silently, testing how it felt. Strange how something so cruel could also be so clarifying. Because once you know how someone truly sees you, you can't unknow it. And once you stop pretending, everything starts to look different. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. I didn't even have to look to know who it was. Brittany. Of course. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I picked up. Hello? I said, keeping my voice steady, almost neutral. Oh my God. Allison Brittany's voice rushed through the line, breathless, laced with panic that sounded just a little too rehearsed. I am so, so sorry. I just realized you were still in the group chat. That message wasn't meant for you. Not meant for me. I almost smiled. I figured I replied calmly. There was a pause, just a fraction of a second, but I caught it. Yeah, I mean, she continued quickly. It was taken out of context. We were just venting. You know how things get sometimes. Venting. That's what she was calling it now. I leaned back in my chair, letting her fill the silence. People like Brittany hated silence. It forced them to reveal more than they intended. I would never actually think that about you, she added, her tone softening. You've done so much for us. We appreciate you, really. The words sounded right, but they felt hollow. Do you? I asked quietly. Another pause? This one longer? Of course we do. She said a little too quickly. Daniel does too. We both do. I glanced down at the screenshot still open on my phone. The thumbs up emoji. Daniel's quiet agreement. I see, I murmured. Brittany hesitated again, then laughed lightly as if trying to ease tension that she could feel slipping out of her control. I think maybe you're overthinking this a little, she said. It was just a private conversation that you weren't supposed to see. There it was. Not denial, not even a real apology. Just redirection. The problem wasn't what she said. The problem was that I saw it. I understand, I replied. And I did. More than she realized. Well, good, Brittany said, sounding relieved. I just didn't want this to become a whole thing. You know, we're family. Family. The word sat between us like something fragile and already broken. Yes, I said softly. We are. We ended the call a few moments later, her voice returning to its usual polished warmth, mine remaining calm and measured. When I set the phone down, I didn't feel better, but I didn't feel worse either. If anything, I felt clearer. Because Brittany hadn't called to apologize. Not really. She had called to manage the situation, to minimize damage, to make sure I stayed exactly where she needed me, to be helpful, quiet, and unquestioning. But something had changed, and she didn't know it yet. The next morning, I moved through my routine like nothing had happened. I got dressed, made breakfast, even picked up Lily from school that afternoon. If anything, I was more attentive than usual, more observant. Lily ran into my arms, like always, her small voice bubbling with excitement as she told me about a class project and a spelling test she was proud of. "Grandma, I got all of them right," she said, beaming. "I'm not surprised," I told her, smiling as I tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You've always been smart." And she had. Sweet, kind, curious. So much like Daniel had been at her age. That thought hit me harder than I expected, because somewhere along the way, something had changed. Not just in him, in me too. On the drive back to their house, I listened more than I spoke. Lily filled the silence effortlessly, unaware of the storm quietly shifting beneath the surface of everything she knew, and I let her. She deserved that. When we pulled into the driveway, Brittany was already home. She stepped out onto the porch as we got out of the car, her smile bright and welcoming, too bright. "Allison," she called, her voice warm, as if nothing had happened at all. "Thank you so much for picking her up." I nodded, returning a polite smile. "Of course." She walked over, giving Lily a quick hug before turning her attention back to me. "Do you want to come in?" I was just about to make coffee. There was a moment, a brief, almost imperceptible flicker in her eyes, as if she were studying me, measuring, trying to figure out how much I knew, how much I believed. I met her gaze calmly. "No, that's okay," I said. "I should get going." "Oh," she replied, just slightly thrown off. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said gently. "I have a few things to take care of today." That wasn't a lie, just not the kind of things she was expecting. "Well, okay," she said, recovering quickly. "Thank you again?" "Really?" I nodded once more, then turned back toward my car. As I pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Brittany was still standing there watching. Not waving, just watching. And for the first time, I realized something important. She wasn't worried about hurting me. She was worried about losing control. That thought stayed with me the entire drive home. And by the time I walked through my front door, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I went straight to my desk, opened the drawer where I kept old documents, insurance papers, bank statements, the kind of things you don't think about until you have to. I pulled out a folder labeled Estate. It had been years since I'd looked at it. Back when Thomas was still alive, we had everything organized, planned, structured. After he passed, I made a few updates, but nothing major. Because at the time, I trusted that things would unfold naturally, that my family would take care of me the same way I had always taken care of them. But trust, I was learning, is only as strong as the people you place it in. And mine had been misplaced. I sat down slowly, opening the folder and scanning the contents. My will, my property deed, investment summaries, all of it neatly arranged just as Thomas had insisted years ago. "You don't wait until there's a problem," he used to say. "You prepare before one ever shows up." I used to think he was being overly cautious. Now I understood, because the problem had already shown up, and it had been sitting at my dinner table for years. I reached for my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and paused on a name I hadn't called in a long time. Margaret Whitmore, Thomas's old friend, a lawyer we had trusted with everything. My finger hovered over the screen for just a second. Then I pressed call. The line rang twice before she answered. Allison Margaret's voice came through warm but surprised. "Well, this is unexpected." I let out a slow breath. "Yes," I said quietly. I think it's time we had a conversation. There was a brief pause. Something in my tone must have reached her. Of course, she said, her voice shifting, becoming more focused. What's going on? I looked down at the folder in front of me, at the life I had built, at everything that was now at risk, and for the first time since reading that message, I felt something stronger than pain. Resolve. I need to understand exactly what my options are, I said, because I think someone is trying to take control of my life. Margaret didn't hesitate. Then we'll make sure they don't. I closed my eyes for just a moment, letting those words settle. Then I opened them again, and this time, I wasn't the same woman who had read that message the night before. This time, I was ready. 2 nights later, Brittany invited me to dinner. The message came through as casually as if nothing had ever happened. Hey, Mom, why don't you come over Friday? We thought it'd be nice to have a family dinner. Just us. Just us. I stared at the screen for a moment, my thumb hovering over the reply button. A week ago, I would have smiled. I would have started planning what to bring, maybe my roast chicken, the one Daniel always loved as a boy. I would have shown up early, helped set the table, made myself useful before anyone even had to ask. But now I understood invitations like this weren't always what they seemed. Still, I replied, that sounds nice. I'll be there. Because sometimes the only way to understand the truth is to let it unfold. Friday evening arrived with an odd kind of stillness. I dressed carefully, not formally, but intentionally. A soft blue blouse, Thomas once said, brought out my eyes a pair of simple pearl earrings I hadn't worn in years. I didn't know exactly why I chose them. Maybe I needed the reminder of who I used to be, of who I still was. When I arrived, Brittany opened the door before I even knocked, her smile immediate and bright. Allison. You look lovely, she said, stepping aside to let me in. Thank you, I replied, my tone warm but measured. The house smelled like garlic and butter, rich, comforting. Too perfect. Daniel stood in the kitchen, setting plates on the counter. Hey, Mom, he said, glancing up. Glad you could make it. I nodded, watching him for a moment longer than usual. There was no sign, no acknowledgement of what had happened in that group chat. No discomfort, no apology, just normalcy. It was almost impressive. Lily ran in from the living room, her face lighting up when she saw me. Grandma, she shouted, wrapping her arms around my waist. I hugged her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. How's my favorite girl? I asked softly. Good. We're having pasta, she said excitedly, as if that alone made the night special. I smiled. I can tell. Dinner was set quickly after that. We gathered around the table, Brittany at one end, Daniel at the other, Lily beside me. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. Conversation flowed easily at first. Lily talked about school. Daniel mentioned work. Brittany chimed in with little comments, laughter that came just a second too late, smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes. And I played my part. I listened. I nodded. I smiled when expected. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is observe. Halfway through dinner, Brittany set her fork down. So she said lightly, glancing between Daniel and me, We've been thinking about something. There it was. I kept my expression neutral. Oh, I replied. Daniel cleared his throat. Yeah, Mom. It's nothing bad. Just something we thought might help. Help. The words settled on the table like a quiet warning. Brittany leaned forward slightly, her tone soft, almost careful. We've just been a little concerned lately, she said, with everything you've been managing on your own. I tilted my head slightly. What do you mean? Oh, you know, she continued, waving her hand gently. The house, your finances, all the day-to-day things. It's a lot for one person. A lot for one person. I almost smiled. I've been managing it for quite some time, I said calmly. Of course, she replied quickly. And you've done an amazing job. Really. But things change. Daniel stepped in, then his voice measured. We just want to make sure you're supported, Mom. That's all. Supported. I glanced down at my plate for a moment, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. Then I looked back up. And how exactly do you suggest doing that? Brittany exchanged a quick look with Daniel before reaching beside her chair. She pulled out a folder, set it gently on the table, and slid it toward me. There's just a few documents, she said. Nothing complicated. It would just allow Daniel to help manage things if needed. If needed. I didn't touch the folder. Instead, I looked at it the way one might look at something unfamiliar, something potentially dangerous. What kind of documents? I asked. Daniel leaned forward slightly. It's just a power of attorney, Mom. Standard stuff. It doesn't change anything right now. It just gives me the ability to step in if something ever happens. Something ever happens. I let those words settle. So I would be giving you control over my finances? I said quietly. Not control, Brittany corrected quickly. Just access. For your benefit. For my benefit. I met her eyes, and for a brief moment the mask slipped. Just slightly, but enough. I see, I said. The room felt different now, heavier. Lily, oblivious to the tension, continued eating her pasta, humming softly under her breath. I reached out gently, taking the folder in my hands. Slowly, deliberately, I opened it. The pages were neat, professional, carefully prepared, but I didn't need to read every word to understand what it was. Broad financial authority, decision-making power, the ability to act on my behalf without my consent once it was in place. I closed the folder, set it back down on the table. I appreciate your concern, I said, my voice steady, but I'm not comfortable signing anything like this. Brittany's smile tightened. It's just a precaution, she insisted. Everyone does it. Not everyone. I replied gently. Daniel shifted in his seat. Mom, we're just trying to help. I looked at him then. Really looked. At the man who used to run to me when he was afraid. At the man who had sat in silence while his wife called me useless. I know, I said softly. But help doesn't feel like this. The words hung in the air. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Brittany let out a small laugh. Well, maybe this just isn't the right time, she said lightly, though the tension in her voice betrayed her. We can revisit it later. Later. I nodded. Yes, I said. We can. But something in my tone must have shifted, because Brittany didn't press further. Not that night. The rest of dinner passed in careful politeness. Too careful. Every word measured, every glance calculated. And when it was over, I stood smoothing my blouse as I prepared to leave. Thank you for dinner, I said. Of course. Brittany replied, her smile returning, though it felt thinner now. We'll talk soon. Yes, I said again. We will. As I stepped outside, the cool evening air hit my face, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were steady, my mind clear, because that dinner hadn't been about reconciliation. It had been a test, a move, and now I knew exactly what they were trying to do. As I walked to my car, I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and glanced briefly at the recording app still running silently in the background. I didn't stop it. Not yet. Because if they wanted to be careful, so would I. I didn't wait long after that dinner. By Monday morning, I was sitting in a quiet office on the second floor of an old brick building downtown across from Margaret Whitmore, the woman who had once helped my husband and me plan every legal detail of our future. She hadn't changed much. Her silver hair was neatly styled, her posture straight, her eyes sharp, in a way that made you feel both seen and evaluated at the same time. If anything, she seemed even more precise than I remembered. Allison, she said gently, folding her hands on the desk, start from the beginning. So I did. I told her everything. The message in the family chat, the silence, the dinner, the documents Brittany had tried to get me to sign, and finally, I handed her my phone. Margaret adjusted her glasses and began reading. She didn't interrupt, didn't react immediately, but I watched her closely, Because after years of working with people and decades of managing financial situations, I had learned something important. The truth doesn't always show in words. It shows in pauses, in small shifts, in what people don't say. Margaret scrolled slowly through the screenshots, her expression growing more focused with each message. When she reached the part about taking control, she stopped, looked up, and met my eyes. "How long have they been discussing this?" she asked. "I don't know exactly," I admitted, "but long enough that it's not new." She nodded once, then continued reading. When she finished, she placed the phone gently on the desk between us. "Well," she said calmly, "you were right to come see me." Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. Why, I asked. She leaned back slightly in her chair. "Because what you're describing isn't just a family misunderstanding," she said. "It's a coordinated attempt to gain legal and financial control over you." The words landed heavier than I expected, even though I had already suspected as much. "Is it illegal?" I asked quietly. Margaret tilted her head. "Not yet," she said. "But it could become very serious if you had signed those documents." I let out a slow breath. What exactly would have happened? She reached for a legal pad and began jotting down a few notes as she spoke. "That document you described, a broad financial power of attorney, would have given your son the legal authority to access your accounts, make financial decisions on your behalf, and in some cases, transfer assets." "Without asking me," I said. "In many situations, yes," she replied, "especially if it's structured to take effect immediately rather than upon incapacity." I felt a chill run through me. So I would have essentially handed over everything. Margaret didn't sugarcoat it. Yes. The word echoed in the room. Simple, final. I looked down at my hands resting in my lap. Steady, but colder now, and if I refused, I asked. She gave a small, thoughtful nod. "Then the next step, based on what I'm seeing here, would likely be an attempt to challenge your capacity." I looked up sharply. "My capacity." She nodded, claiming that you're no longer able to manage your own affairs. It's not uncommon in situations like this. A memory surfaced instantly. Brittany's words. "She's not getting any younger. We have to start thinking ahead." My chest tightened. "They've already started, haven't they?" I said. Margaret didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for her computer, typing something quickly before turning the screen slightly toward me. "I ran a preliminary check before you came in," she said, "just to see if anything had been filed." My heart skipped. And she pointed to the screen. "There was an inquiry submitted about your property records 2 weeks ago," she said. "Nothing formal yet, but it wasn't random." Who submitted it? I asked, though I already had a feeling I knew the answer. Margaret's expression hardened just slightly. "It was requested under the name Brittany Allen," she said, "listed as family representative." I closed my eyes for a moment. There it was. Confirmation, not suspicion, not fear. Fact. "They're preparing," I whispered. Margaret nodded. "Yes," she said. "And based on the tone of those messages, I would say they're planning to move carefully. Carefully. Smartly. Exactly as Brittany had said." I opened my eyes again. "So what do I do?" I asked. Margaret leaned forward slightly, her voice steady and assured. "You take control before they do." The irony of that sentence wasn't lost on me. I almost smiled. How I asked? She began outlining options. Clear, precise, practical. First, she said, "We secure your assets." That means reviewing all your accounts, updating access permissions, and making sure no one has unauthorized visibility or influence. I nodded slowly. "I can do that." Second, she continued, "We update your legal documents, your will, any existing power of attorney healthcare directives. Everything." I hesitated slightly. "I haven't changed much since Thomas passed." "Then it's time," she said gently. I exhaled. "Yes, I think it is." Third, she added, "We establish a record." "A record." "Yes," she said. "Documentation. Evidence. If they attempt to claim you're not capable, We need proof that you are. I thought about the screenshots. The recorded dinner conversations still saved on my phone. I've already started, I said quietly. Margaret gave a small approving nod. Good. She paused, then studied me for a moment. There's one more thing you need to understand, Allison. What's that? She held my gaze. This isn't just about money, she said. It's about control. And people who pursue control like this don't usually stop easily. A familiar weight settled in my chest. Not fear. Something else. Awareness. I figured, I said. She leaned back again, folding her hands. Then you need to decide something. She continued. Are you trying to preserve the relationship or protect yourself? The question hung in the air. Heavy. Unavoidable. I didn't answer right away. Because for years, my instinct had always been the same. Protect the relationship, keep the peace, hold the family together, even if it meant giving more than I should, even if it meant ignoring what I didn't want to see. But now I understood something I hadn't before. You can't preserve a relationship that only exists when you're useful, and you can't hold together something that's already been quietly taken apart behind your back. I looked at Margaret, really looked, and for the first time, I answered honestly. I'm going to protect myself, I said. She didn't smile, but something in her expression softened. Good, she said. Then we begin today. As I stood to leave, she handed me a folder, new documents, next steps, everything clearly outlined. It felt different from the one Brittany had placed in front of me. This one wasn't about taking something from me. It was about giving something back. Control, clarity, choice. When I stepped outside, the sunlight felt brighter than usual, sharper, like the world had come back into focus after being slightly blurred for too long. I walked to my car, slowly taking a moment before getting in, because I knew something now, something I couldn't ignore. Brittany had made her move. Daniel had chosen silence, and I had seen the truth. But what they didn't know was that I had already started making mine. On the drive home from Margaret's office, I didn't turn on the radio. I wanted the silence. Not the heavy, suffocating kind that had filled my house the night I read that message, but a different kind. A quiet that allowed everything to settle into place. Because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't reacting. I was thinking, deliberately, carefully. The road stretched ahead of me in soft afternoon light, and somewhere between one stoplight and the next, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to fully admit before Brittany didn't actually know who I was. Not really. She knew the version of me I had shown her. The one who cooked without being asked, who gave without keeping track, who said yes before anyone had to insist. She knew the woman who had made herself small in order to make everyone else comfortable. But she didn't know the woman I had been before all of that, before retirement, before widowhood, before I had slowly, quietly reshaped myself into someone whose value was measured by how helpful she could be. She didn't know that for over 30 years, I had managed financial operations for one of the largest hospital systems in the region, that I had overseen budgets most people couldn't even imagine, that I had negotiated contracts, identified risks, and most importantly, recognized patterns. Patterns of behavior, patterns of intention, patterns of people who believed they were being clever, because they always thought they were the first. They never were. By the time I pulled into my driveway, that realization had settled into something solid, something steady, something that felt a lot like control. I stepped inside my house and set my purse down on the entry table, pausing for just a moment as I looked around. Everything was the same. The framed photos, the worn edges of the furniture Thomas and I had chosen together, the quiet hum of a space that had held decades of my life. But I wasn't the same, and that meant something had to change. I walked straight to my office. Not the kitchen, not the living room, the office. A space I hadn't used in years, not really. It had become more of a storage room than anything else, filled with old files, boxes, reminders of a professional life I had slowly stepped away from. But now it felt like exactly where I needed to be. I pulled the curtains open, letting light flood the room. Then I sat down at the desk. For a moment, I just rested my hands on the surface, feeling the familiarity of it beneath my fingertips. And then I got to work. I started with my accounts, bank statements, investment summaries, everything Margaret had told me to review. At first glance, nothing looked out of place, but I didn't stop at the surface. I went deeper, checked access permissions, authorized users, linked accounts, and that's when I noticed it. A secondary email address connected to one of my investment platforms. Not unfamiliar, but not mine. My chest tightened slightly as I clicked into the details. There it was, an email address I recognized immediately. Brittany's. I stared at it for a long moment, my mind moving quickly, connecting pieces. I hadn't added that. I knew I hadn't, which meant one of two things had happened. Either I had been persuaded subtly, indirectly, to grant access at some point without fully realizing it, or someone had guided me through a process where I believed I was doing something routine while they were doing something else entirely. I leaned back slowly in my chair because suddenly the timeline shifted. This wasn't something that had started recently. This had been building, quietly, carefully, and I had been part of it without even knowing. A memory surfaced 6 months ago. Brittany sitting at my kitchen table, her laptop open. "Allison, can you just log into your account real quick?" she had said casually. "Daniel's trying to figure something out, and it'll be easier if we can see everything in one place." I remembered hesitating, just slightly, and then giving in, because it seemed harmless, because I trusted them, because why wouldn't I? Now sitting there in that office, staring at the evidence in front of me, I felt something shift again. Not shock, not even anger. Something colder, more precise, understanding. They hadn't just been planning to take control, they had already started. I reached for my phone, took a screenshot, saved it, then another, and another. Every piece of information that confirmed what I was beginning to see clearly now. Because if there was one thing I knew, it was that documentation mattered. Emotion could be dismissed. Words could be denied. But records told the truth. I spent the next 2 hours going through everything, carefully, methodically, like I used to. And the more I looked, the more I found. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious enough to raise immediate alarm, but enough. Enough to show a pattern. Access points. Permissions. Small openings that over time could become something much larger. By the time I finished, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the room. I closed my laptop slowly and sat there in the quiet, processing, because this wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. This was about understanding exactly how far things had gone and what I needed to do next. I stood stretching slightly before walking back into the main part of the house. The familiar space felt different now. Not smaller, not emptier, just clearer. I moved through it, slowly stopping briefly at the mantel where a photo of Thomas still stood. I picked it up, running my fingers lightly over the frame. "You always said to pay attention," I murmured softly. I should have listened sooner, but regret wasn't useful now, only action was. I set the photo back in place, then returned to my office, pulling out the folder Margaret had given me earlier that day. I opened it again, reviewing the steps she had outlined. Secure accounts, update legal documents, establish records. Each one now carried more weight than it had just a few hours ago, because now I wasn't just acting on suspicion, I was acting on proof. I reached for my phone again, scrolled to Margaret's number, and sent a message. I found something. Brittany already has access to one of my accounts. I didn't authorize it knowingly. Her response came quicker than I expected. "Lock everything down immediately. Do not confront them yet. We'll address this properly." I nodded to myself, even though she couldn't see it. Properly. That was the key. Because this wasn't about reacting emotionally. This was about strategy, about timing, about making sure that when I did act, it would matter. I closed the folder once more, and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. For years, I had believed that being generous would keep my family close, that being needed would keep me valued. But now I understood something different. Being needed isn't the same as being respected, and being useful isn't the same as being loved. The room was quiet again, but this time it felt steady, grounded, because I wasn't lost in it anymore. I was standing in it, clear-eyed, focused, and ready. Because whatever Brittany thought she was building, whatever Daniel believed he could quietly allow, they had made one mistake. They thought I wasn't paying attention, but I was now, and I wasn't going to look away again. The call from the social worker came on a Thursday morning, just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. The number was unfamiliar. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Lately, I had learned to be cautious about calls about people, about anything that arrived unannounced. But something made me answer. Hello. Good morning. May I speak with Allison Allen? The voice on the other end asked polite professional, carefully neutral. This is she. My name is Karen Douglas. I'm a social worker with Buncombe County Adult Services. I didn't react right away. I simply listened, because I had been expecting something like this. All right, I said calmly. How can I help you, Ms. Douglas? There was a brief pause, as if she were choosing her words carefully. We received a report expressing concern about your well-being, she said, specifically regarding your ability to manage your daily living and financial responsibilities. There it was, not a surprise, but hearing it spoken out loud still felt like a quiet intrusion. I see, I replied evenly. We take these reports seriously, she continued, and our role is simply to ensure that individuals are safe and supported. I'd like to schedule a visit with you if that's all right. I leaned back slightly in my chair, my mind already moving ahead of the conversation. A visit meant documentation, observation, evaluation. Exactly the kind of groundwork Brittany would need if she intended to challenge my capacity. Of course, I said. You're welcome to come by. Another pause. This one shorter. Thank you, Ms. Allen, Karen said. I appreciate your cooperation. We arranged a time for the following day. When the call ended, I set my phone down gently on the table. Then I sat there for a moment, not shocked, not angry, just aware. Because this wasn't random. It wasn't coincidence. It was a move. And I knew exactly who had made it. I reached for my phone again and opened my messages. Margaret, I typed quickly. They've escalated. Social worker scheduled for tomorrow. Anonymous report about my capacity. The reply came within minutes. Expect it. Stay calm. Cooperate fully. Document everything. This will work in your favor if handled correctly. I exhaled slowly. Handled correctly. That was the key now. Not emotion, not reaction. Precision. The rest of the day passed in quiet preparation. Not the kind Brittany might have imagined. No panic, no scrambling. Just order. I went through my house carefully. Not because anything was wrong, but because I wanted everything to reflect exactly what it was: stable, organized, clear. I reviewed my bills paid on time, neatly filed. My kitchen clean, stocked, functional. My medications labeled managed, consistent. I wasn't creating an image. I was simply making sure the truth was visible. That evening, I allowed myself one moment of reflection. Sitting in the living room, I thought about how easily this could have gone differently. If I hadn't seen that message, if I had signed those documents, if I had continued trusting without question. By the time the social worker arrived, the narrative would already be written, and I would have been living inside it. That realization settled into something firm inside me. Not fear, resolve. The next morning, I dressed simply but intentionally. Comfortable, appropriate, nothing exaggerated. When the doorbell rang, I answered it without hesitation. Karen Douglas stood on the porch, a woman in her early 50s, composed, observant, with the kind of presence that suggested she had seen many versions of situations like this. Ms. Allen, she asked with a polite smile. Yes, I said, stepping aside. Please come in. She entered slowly, her eyes taking in the space without being obvious about it. Professional. Careful. We sat in the living room and she began with basic questions. How have you been feeling lately? Fine, I answered honestly. Are you managing your daily routines without difficulty? Yes. She nodded, making notes on a small tablet. Do you have regular support from family? There it was. I met her gaze calmly. I have family, I said. Support is a more complicated question. She paused just slightly. Noted that. Good. We continued. Finances, health, daily activities, each question precise, each answer steady. At no point did I rush. At no point did I become defensive, because I understood something now. This wasn't about convincing her. It was about allowing her to observe, to see. After about 20 minutes, she set her tablet aside. Would you mind if I took a brief look around? She asked. Not at all, I said, standing. I walked her through the house. Kitchen, bedroom, office, everything in its place. Everything exactly as it should be. When we reached my office, her attention lingered for a moment on the desk, the open folder, the organized documents. You handle your own finances, she asked. I always have, I replied. She nodded slowly. We returned to the living room. She sat again studying me for a moment longer than before. Then she spoke. Ms. Allen, I'm going to be direct with you. I appreciate that, I said. The report we received suggested significant concerns about your cognitive and functional capacity, she said. Based on what I've observed today, I'm not seeing evidence that supports those claims. I didn't react outwardly, but something inside me settled. Thank you, I said simply. She gave a small, thoughtful nod. However, she continued, I do need to ask, do you know who might have made this report? I held her gaze, and for a brief moment, I considered telling her everything. The messages, the dinner, the documents, but I stopped myself, because timing mattered. Someone who is concerned about control, I said carefully, not about my well-being. Karen studied me for a moment, then nodded. I understand. She stood gathering her things. I'll be closing this case with no findings of concern, she said, but I would advise you to remain cautious. I walked her to the door. Thank you for coming, I said. She paused on the porch. Ms. Allen. She added, her voice quieter. Now situations like this don't usually resolve themselves. Be careful who you trust. I met her eyes. I've learned that, I said. After she left, I closed the door slowly and leaned against it for just a second, not out of exhaustion, out of clarity, because that visit hadn't just been a test, it had been confirmation. They had moved, and I had met that move without faltering. I walked back into the living room, my steps steady, picked up my phone, opened my messages, and typed one sentence to Margaret. The report has been dismissed. We're ready for the next step. I stared at the screen for a moment before setting it down, because now everything was in place. The evidence, the documentation, the awareness. They had tried to paint me as incapable, as fragile, as someone who needed to be managed. But they had made one mistake. They had underestimated me. And now it was my turn. Becca arrived on a gray Sunday afternoon, the kind where the sky hung low and heavy, like it was carrying something it hadn't decided whether to release. I saw her car pull into the driveway before she even knocked. For a moment, I just stood by the window watching. My daughter. My first child. The one who used to sit at the kitchen counter swinging her legs while I cooked, asking questions about everything. The one who had read that message and said almost nothing. I won't pretend that didn't matter, because it did. Silence always does. But when I opened the door, I didn't greet her with anger. I greeted her with truth. Hi, Mom, Becca said softly, standing there with her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, her posture uncertain in a way I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. Hi, I replied, stepping aside. Come in. She walked in slowly, her eyes scanning the room like she was looking for something, maybe signs of damage, maybe signs of distance, maybe both. I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me, she admitted as she set her bag down. I wasn't sure either, I said honestly. That made her flinch. Just slightly. But she didn't look away. Fair enough, she said. We stood there for a moment, the space between us filled with everything that hadn't been said yet. Then I gestured toward the living room. Sit, I said gently. She nodded, moving to the couch. I sat across from her, not beside her. Not yet. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Becca took a breath. I saw the message, she said. I know, I replied. I should have said more, she added quickly, her voice tightening. I should have defended you. I didn't know how to handle it in that moment. I watched her carefully, not judging, observing. Why not? I asked. She hesitated. Because that was the real question. Not whether she saw it, but why she stayed quiet. I didn't want to make it worse, she said finally. Brittany gets intense. And Daniel, he just shuts down when there's conflict. I thought if I said something, it would turn into this whole thing. I let that sit for a moment. Then I asked quietly, and this isn't a whole thing. Her eyes dropped. No, she admitted. It is. There was honesty there. Late, but real. And what about me? I asked. Did you think about how it felt to read that? Her face tightened, and I saw the guilt surface more clearly now. I did, she said. After. I just froze in the moment. I nodded slowly. I understand freezing, I said. But silence doesn't stay neutral. It chooses a side. She swallowed hard. I know, she whispered. We sat in that for a moment. Not comfortable, but necessary. Then she looked up again. There's something else, she said. I didn't interrupt, because I had a feeling this was why she was really here. Brittany's been talking to me, she continued, not just in the group chat. Privately. My attention sharpened. What about Becca hesitated again, but this time it wasn't uncertainty. It was reluctance. She's been asking what I think about you living alone, she said, about whether I've noticed any changes, if you seem forgetful or overwhelmed. I didn't react outwardly, but inside something settled further into place. How long, I asked. A few months, Becca admitted. Months. Not weeks. Months. And what did you say, I asked? She met my eyes. I told her you're fine, she said. That you've always been independent, that you manage everything better than most people I know. There was sincerity in her voice. I believed her. But she kept pushing, Becca added, saying things like, we just need to be proactive, and it's better to act early than wait for something bad to happen. I almost smiled. The language was familiar, strategic, carefully framed concern that masked something else entirely. And Daniel, I asked. Becca's expression shifted. He's involved, she said quietly. Maybe not as directly as Brittany, but he's not unaware. That wasn't new information. But hearing it confirmed still carried weight. He asked me once if I'd support them if they tried to step in, she continued. He didn't say it exactly like that, but that's what he meant. And what did you say? I asked. I said I wasn't comfortable with it, she replied. Not unless there was an actual reason. I nodded. That mattered. Even if it hadn't been said loudly. Even if it hadn't been said when I needed it most. It still mattered. There's more, Becca said, her voice dropping slightly. I waited. He already filled out some paperwork, she said. Nothing filed yet, but forms for a capacity evaluation. I saw them at their house. There it was, the piece that completed the picture. They're preparing, I said quietly. Becca nodded. Yes. For a moment, the room felt very still, because this wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was confirmation, layered, structured, real. I'm sorry, Becca said suddenly, her voice breaking slightly. I should have come to you sooner. I should have said something before it got this far. I looked at her. Really looked. At the regret, at the fear, at the part of her that still wanted to do the right thing, even if it had taken too long. Yes, I said gently. You should have. She flinched again. But I didn't soften the truth, because some things need to be acknowledged before they can be repaired. I don't expect perfection, I continued, but I do expect honesty and courage. Her eyes filled slightly, but she didn't look away. I'm here now, she said. Yes, I replied, and for the first time since she arrived, I let my posture relax just a little. Why, I asked. The question wasn't accusing, it was genuine. Why now? Why come forward at this point? Becca took a breath. Because it's gone too far, she said, and because I realized something after that message. What I asked. That if I stayed quiet, I was helping them, she said. The words landed with a quiet weight, because they were true. Silence doesn't just avoid conflict, it enables it. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said. You were. Another moment passed. Then she leaned forward slightly. What are you going to do? She asked. There was concern in her voice, but also curiosity, because she knew something had changed. She just didn't know how much. I stood walking over to the small table beside the couch where I had left a folder earlier that morning. Margaret's folder. I picked it up, brought it back, and set it in front of her. I've already started, I said. Becca looked down at it, then back up at me. What is this protection? I replied simply. She opened the folder, slowly scanning the documents inside. Legal updates, asset reviews, notes, evidence. Her eyes widened slightly as she began to understand. You're preparing, she said. Yes. For what I held her gaze. For the truth I said. She closed the folder gently, her expression shifting from surprise to something else. Respect. Maybe even relief. Do you need my help? She asked. The question hung between us, and for a moment I considered it, because trust doesn't return all at once. It rebuilds slowly, carefully, but it does rebuild. Yes, I said finally. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. What can I do? I sat back down, my voice steady. Tell me everything you know, I said. No filtering, no protecting anyone, just the truth. She nodded. I will. And as she began to speak again, filling in details I hadn't yet uncovered, I realized something important. For the first time since this all began, I wasn't alone. The idea for the birthday dinner came to me that same night after Becca left. Not as a celebration, as a stage. I sat in my office, the soft glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the papers, spread in front of me. Margaret's notes, my own documentation, the screenshots that had started all of this. For a long time, I had reacted to life, adjusted, accommodated, smoothed over discomfort to keep peace. But now, for the first time in years, I was planning. And planning, when done properly, is not about control. It's about clarity. If Brittany and Daniel wanted to be smart about this, then I would give them the perfect opportunity. I picked up my phone and opened the family group chat. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for just a moment before I began to type. Hi, everyone. I've been thinking a lot lately, and I've decided it's time to organize my affairs and make some important decisions about the future. I'd love for all of you to come over next Saturday for my birthday. It would mean a lot to me to have everyone there. I read it once, twice. Simple, warm, just vague enough. Then I added one more line. I also plan to go over how I'd like to handle my estate moving forward. I pressed send and waited. The response came faster than I expected. Brittany, that sounds like a great idea, Mom. We'll definitely be there. Of course she would. Daniel followed shortly after. Happy early birthday, Mom. Let us know what we can bring. Becca didn't respond immediately, but I knew she had seen it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen as the chat slowly filled with polite confirmations from extended family. They thought this was about generosity, about distribution, about opportunity. They didn't understand what it really was. Not yet. The rest of the week passed in careful preparation. Not frantic, not emotional, deliberate. I spoke with Margaret twice more, outlining exactly what I intended to do. She listened without interruption the first time. Then when I finished, she gave a single measured nod. It's risky, she said. I know, but if it's executed correctly, she continued, it could expose everything you need it to. That's the point, I replied. She studied me for a moment. Then something in her expression shifted. Not concern, not hesitation. Approval. Then we'll make sure it's done correctly, she said. We arranged everything. Discreetly, legally. Every detail accounted for. By Friday evening, the house was ready. Not extravagant, just welcoming. Clean, organized, familiar. I cooked, but not excessively. I wanted the atmosphere to feel natural, not staged. Because the truth doesn't need decoration. It just needs space to reveal itself. Saturday arrived with a quiet kind of anticipation. I woke early, not out of nerves, but clarity. I dressed with intention again. A soft cream blouse, tailored slacks, simple jewelry. Nothing dramatic, but nothing careless either. This wasn't just a family gathering. This was a moment. And I intended to meet it fully. By mid-afternoon, people began to arrive. First, Becca. She stepped inside her eyes, meeting mine immediately. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly, her voice low enough that no one else would hear. Yes, I said. She nodded, though I could see the tension in her shoulders. Okay, she whispered. Next came Daniel and Brittany. They entered together, Brittany carrying a neatly wrapped gift, Daniel holding a bottle of wine. Happy birthday, Mom, Daniel said, stepping forward to hug me. I accepted it, but I didn't lean into it the way I used to. Brittany followed with her own embrace. You look beautiful, she said warmly. Thank you, I replied. And then I stepped back, because closeness, I had learned, should never be assumed. It should be earned. The room filled gradually. Aunts, cousins, familiar faces, laughter, conversation. On the surface, everything looked exactly like it always had. That was important, because the truth reveals itself best when people feel comfortable, safe, unaware. Dinner passed without incident. Stories were shared, memories revisited. Even Brittany seemed relaxed, laughing easily, engaging with others, playing her role flawlessly. But I watched. Not her performance, her moments in between. The glances, the subtle exchanges with Daniel, the quiet calculation behind her eyes when she thought no one was paying attention. I had seen that look before, in meetings, in negotiations, in people who believed they were about to gain something. And then after dessert, I stood. Just slightly, enough to shift the room's attention. I'd like to say something, I said. The conversation quieted almost immediately. Not completely, but enough. I looked around the room, at the people who had been part of my life for decades, at my children, at the woman who had called me useless, and I smiled. I'm very grateful that all of you came today, I began. It means more to me than I can fully express. That part was true, even now, especially now. I've spent a lot of time recently reflecting. I continued, about my life, my family, and what I want moving forward. Brittany leaned forward slightly, almost imperceptibly, but I saw it. Interest. Expectation. I've always believed in taking care of the people I love, I said, in giving what I can when I can. A few nods around the room. Agreement? Recognition? But I've also realized something important. I added, my voice steady, that giving without boundaries can sometimes create misunderstandings. That got their attention. Fully. Now. I've made some decisions, I said, and this time the silence was complete, because something in my tone had shifted, something they couldn't quite define, but could feel. Brittany's smile remained in place, but it tightened, just slightly. What kind of decisions, she asked lightly. I met her gaze, calm, unwavering, the kind that ensure my life and everything in it remains in the right hands, I said. Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, then steadied again. Well, that sounds very responsible, she said. We've actually been thinking about— I know, I interrupted gently. Not harsh, not confrontational, but enough to stop her. The room stilled, because interruptions like that weren't my habit. I'm aware of what you've been thinking, I continued, and now the air changed, not dramatically, but enough, because something beneath the surface had just begun to shift. Brittany didn't speak. Daniel didn't move. Becca watched me carefully, and I knew in that moment that the stage was set. Everything was in place. The truth was no longer hidden. It was waiting, right there, on the edge of being seen. For a moment after I said, I'm aware of what you've been thinking, no one moved. Not a fork, not a chair, not even a breath loud enough to break the silence. It was the kind of stillness that doesn't just fill a room, it presses against it. Brittany recovered first. Of course she did. She always did. Her smile didn't disappear, but it changed, tightened, sharpened, just enough to reveal what sat underneath it. I'm not sure what you mean, she said lightly, though her tone carried a faint edge now. I held her gaze. You will? I replied calmly. Daniel shifted beside her, his hand tightening around the stem of his wine glass. Mom, he started, his voice uncertain, but I didn't look at him. Not yet, because this moment wasn't about easing into comfort. It was about clarity. I reached down beside the table where I had placed a small stack of folders earlier, prepared, organized, waiting. I picked them up and set them gently in front of me. You're right about one thing, Brittany. I said, my voice steady, but no longer soft. We do need to be smart about this. Her eyes flickered again, just briefly, but this time she didn't speak. Because something had shifted. She could feel it. They all could. I spent many years managing financial systems. I continued looking around the room now, not just at her, but at everyone. Large ones, complex ones, situations where people believed they were being careful, strategic, even clever. I paused. Let the words settle. And I learned something very important during that time. No one interrupted. No one dared. The people who think they're the smartest in the room, I said quietly, are usually the ones who underestimate everyone else. That landed. I saw it. In Brittany's posture, in Daniel's face, in the subtle shift of attention from everyone at the table. Then I opened the top folder. Slowly, deliberately. This, I said, sliding a printed screenshot across the table, is a conversation that took place in our family group chat. Brittany's expression didn't collapse. Not immediately. But her eyes moved, just slightly, toward the paper. And that was enough. Would you like me to read it out loud? I asked. Her jaw tightened. I think that's unnecessary, she said quickly. I don't, I replied. And without raising my voice, I read it, word for word. Every message, every line, every carefully chosen phrase that had been meant to stay hidden. The room didn't just go quiet, it changed. Because hearing something out loud strips it of denial. When I finished, I set the paper down. No dramatic gesture, no anger, just truth. That's what you said about me, I said, looking directly at Brittany. For a moment, she didn't respond. Then she let out a small breath, half laugh, half exhale. This is ridiculous, she said. We've already talked about this. That was taken out of context. Explain the context, then, I said calmly. She hesitated, just for a second. But in that second, the room noticed. We were venting, she said finally. People say things they don't mean all the time. I nodded slightly. Then let's look at what you meant, I said. I opened the second folder, pulled out another document. This, I continued, is a record of an inquiry made into my property and financial information 2 weeks ago. I placed it on the table, filed under your name. That one hit harder, because this wasn't emotion. This was evidence. Brittany's face changed now, not dramatically, but enough. I was just trying to understand things, she said quickly. As part of the family. As part of the family, I repeated softly, and for the first time there was a slight edge in my voice. You mean as part of a plan? Daniel stood abruptly. Mom, this is going too far, he said. I turned to him then. Finally. Is it? I asked. He hesitated, because he knew. He knew exactly how far it had already gone. You could have talked to me, he said, instead of this. I looked at him steadily. I tried, I said, for years. You just preferred when I didn't ask questions. That silenced him. Completely. I reached for the third folder, opened it. This, I said, is a copy of a financial access record showing that Brittany was given visibility into one of my investment accounts. I let that sit, then added quietly, without my informed consent. The room shifted again, a low murmur from someone at the far end of the table. Confusion, discomfort, realization. Brittany straightened. That's not true, she said firmly. You gave us access. I logged into my account while you sat beside me, I replied. You guided the process. You didn't explain it. Her lips parted slightly, closed again, because there was no clean way out of that, and she knew it. I closed the folder, folded my hands in front of me, calm, controlled. This isn't about a misunderstanding, I said. It's about a pattern. No one spoke, because now they were listening, really listening. You didn't just insult me, I continued. You prepared to control me, financially, legally, personally. I let my gaze move between Brittany and Daniel. And you, I added. Looking at my son chose silence while it happened. His face fell. Not defensively this time, but something else. Recognition. I didn't know how to handle it, he said quietly. That's not the same as not knowing it was wrong, I replied. He didn't argue, because he couldn't. Then I stood, not abruptly, but with purpose. There's one more thing, I said. And as I spoke, the door behind them opened, softly. Margaret Whitmore stepped inside, composed, professional, unmistakable. A few people turned startled. Brittany's head snapped around. What is this? She asked, her voice no longer steady. This, I said calmly, is Margaret Whitmore, my attorney. The word attorney landed like a stone. Margaret stepped forward, placing a folder on the table. I've been working with Ms. Allen to review her legal and financial protections, she said evenly. And I can confirm that everything presented here is both accurate and documented. Brittany's composure cracked then. Not completely, but enough. This is insane, she said. We were trying to help. Help doesn't involve deception, Margaret replied calmly. Daniel looked between us, between the documents, between the truth and everything he had allowed. Mom, he said again, his voice weaker now. But I didn't soften. Not this time. Don't, I said quietly, because this wasn't the moment for repair. This was the moment for truth. And truth doesn't negotiate. It doesn't soften itself to make others comfortable. It simply stands and waits for people to face it. No one spoke for a long moment after Margaret's words settled over the table. It wasn't just silence. It was the kind of silence that comes when something carefully hidden has been dragged fully into the light and no one knows how to put it back. Brittany tried anyway. Of course she did. She straightened in her chair, her shoulders lifting slightly as if posture alone could restore control. This is being completely blown out of proportion, she said, her voice sharp, now stripped of its earlier sweetness. We were trying to make sure you were taken care of. That's it. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I reached for another document, one I hadn't shown yet, one that mattered more than anything else. Let's talk about taking care of me, I said quietly. I slid the paper across the table toward her, then another, and another, a series of printed statements, transactions, dates, amounts. Brittany frowned slightly, then reached out to pick one up. Her eyes moved across the page, and for the first time that evening, she lost her footing. This is... She started, but didn't finish. Go ahead, I said gently. Read it. She swallowed, then read, out loud. Mortgage assistance, $6,000, last year. Her voice faltered. She picked up the next page. Credit card payment, $2,300, Then another. School tuition, 3,000. Her hand tightened slightly around the paper. The room had gone completely still again, because now this wasn't about accusation. It was about reality. I kept records, I said calmly. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I was responsible for my own finances. I looked at Daniel, then back at Brittany. These are just the larger amounts, I continued. They don't include the smaller ones. Groceries, utilities, vacations. I paused. Let the weight of it settle. Over the past 5 years, I said quietly, I have contributed more to your household than you may even realize. Daniel's face drained of color. Mom, I didn't know it was that much, he said. I met his eyes. You didn't ask? I replied. That hurt him. I could see it. But truth often does. Brittany set the papers down, her expression shifting rapidly. Now calculation, defensiveness, something almost like panic trying to stay hidden beneath it all. We always intended to pay you back, she said quickly. I tilted my head slightly. When I asked, she opened her mouth, closed it again. Because intention without action is just delay. We've had a lot going on, she added, her voice tightening. You know that. Yes, I said softly. I do. I leaned forward slightly, now my tone still calm but firmer. I also know that while I was helping you stay afloat, you were discussing how to take control of what I have left. That landed harder than anything before it, because it connected everything, not just the words, but the actions behind them. Brittany's composure cracked again, more visibly this time. That's not what this is, she insisted. No, I asked. I reached for one final document, the one Margaret had prepared, carefully, legally. This, I said, placing it on the table, is a revised version of my estate plan. Daniel's head lifted sharply. What? I've updated everything, I continued. My will, my asset distribution, my financial protections. Brittany's eyes locked onto the document. Focused. Intense. What does that mean, she asked. It wasn't curiosity. It was urgency. I met her gaze. It means, I said, that decisions about my life will no longer be influenced by people who see me as something to manage. Daniel stepped forward slightly. Mom, you don't have to do this, he said, his voice strained. We can talk about it. We can fix this. I looked at him, really looked, at the man he had become, at the choices he had made, at the silence he had chosen. This isn't something that broke overnight, I said gently, and it's not something that gets fixed in one conversation. He swallowed hard. I made a mistake, he said. I should have said something earlier. I should have, yes? I interrupted softly. You should have. Again, I didn't soften the truth, because he needed to feel it, not as punishment, but as understanding. I trusted you, I continued, not just as my son, but as someone who would protect me when it mattered. His eyes dropped. I thought you were protecting your peace, I added, but what you were really doing was protecting their behavior. The room shifted again, because that truth extended beyond him, beyond Brittany, to anyone who had stayed silent. Becca lowered her gaze slightly. Others at the table shifted uncomfortably, because now they understood. Silence wasn't neutral. It was participation. Brittany stood abruptly. I'm not going to sit here and be painted like some kind of villain, she said, her voice rising. We've done nothing wrong. Margaret spoke before I could. You attempted to obtain financial control under misleading circumstances, she said calmly. You initiated inquiries into assets without proper authority. And you participated in discussions suggesting intent to limit Ms. Allen's autonomy. Each word was precise, measured, undeniable. Brittany turned to Daniel. Are you just going to stand there? She demanded. He didn't respond. Not immediately, because for the first time, he wasn't choosing silence. He was choosing to see. I didn't realize how far this had gone, he said finally. You were part of it, Brittany snapped. I let it happen, he replied. That's not the same thing. She stared at him. stunned, because something had shifted, not in her, in him, and she hadn't expected that. I watched them quietly, because this wasn't mine to control. This was theirs, the consequences of their choices, the reality of their actions. I'm not cutting you out of my life, I said finally, my voice calm but firm. But I am setting boundaries. I let my gaze move between them. Financially, everything changes as of today, I continued. No more support, no more access, no more assumptions. Brittany let out a sharp breath. This is unbelievable, she said. No, I replied softly. This is clarity. Daniel looked at me again. What about everything you've already given? He asked. I considered that for a moment, then shook my head slightly. That was given freely, I said, and I don't regret it. That surprised him. I could see it. But what comes next? He asked. I held his gaze. That depends on you, I said. Not them, him, because he still had a choice. Even now, even after everything. The room was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was settled, because the truth had been spoken, clearly, completely. And nothing about this situation would ever go back to what it had been before, nor should it. After the room settled into that quiet, exposed stillness, it didn't take long for the next fracture to form. It wasn't me who broke it. It was Brittany. She turned to Daniel with a sharp, almost disbelieving look, like she had just realized something fundamental had shifted, and she didn't like where it was heading. Say something, she demanded, her voice tight. Tell her this is ridiculous. Daniel didn't respond right away. He stood there, his shoulders slightly slumped, his eyes fixed somewhere between the table and the documents still spread across it, evidence of things he could no longer ignore. I already did, he said quietly. Brittany blinked. What I said? Something he repeated. Though it wasn't defensive, it was reflective. Just not when it mattered. The room held its breath again. Because this wasn't an argument anymore. This was recognition. You're really going to stand there and let her do this? Brittany pressed, her tone rising now. After everything we've been through? After everything we've built together? Daniel looked at her. Not with anger. Not even with frustration. But with something far more unsettling. Clarity. What have we built? He asked. The question landed hard, because it wasn't rhetorical. It was real. Brittany let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. Are you serious right now? She said. A life? A family? Stability? We've worked for everything we have. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. No, he said. We haven't. Her expression froze. What is that supposed to mean? It means, he hesitated, then exhaled slowly. It means Mom helped us more than we ever admitted, more than I ever wanted to admit. There was something raw in his voice now, something unfiltered. I kept telling myself it was temporary, he continued, that we'd pay her back, that it wasn't dependence. He glanced at the papers again. But it wasn't temporary, he said, and it wasn't just help. Brittany crossed her arms. So now you're blaming me? She snapped. I'm blaming both of us, he replied. She shook her head, disbelief turning into something sharper. No, she said. Don't do that. Don't rewrite this like you weren't right there with me every step of the way. Daniel didn't deny it. I was, he said. Then stand by it, she shot back. Stand by us? There it was. The line. Drawn clearly. Not subtle. Not hidden. A choice. I watched them quietly, my hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. Because this moment didn't belong to me. It belonged to them. Daniel looked at her for a long time. Long enough that the rest of the room seemed to fade slightly, as if everything else had stepped back to give this moment space. I did stand by us, he said finally. Every time I stayed quiet. Every time I let you say things I knew weren't right. His voice didn't rise, but it didn't waver either. I told myself it was easier, he added, that keeping the peace mattered more than confronting anything. Brittany's eyes narrowed. And now she asked. He swallowed. Now I realize that keeping the peace cost me something I can't replace. She didn't need to ask what that was. We all knew. Me. His mother. The relationship he had slowly, quietly allowed to erode. You're overreacting. Brittany said, though there was less certainty in her tone now. This is all because of one stupid message. Daniel shook his head. No, he said. It's because of everything behind it. She stared at him, searching, trying to find the version of him she had known, the one who would deflect, minimize, avoid. But that version wasn't standing there anymore. This is about control, he continued. And I let it happen because I didn't want to deal with conflict. He let out a small, bitter breath. I chose comfort over honesty. The room remained silent, but it was different now. Less tense, more grounded, because something honest had finally been said. Brittany looked around the table then, as if expecting someone, anyone, to step in to support her, to shift the narrative back in her favor. But no one did. Not this time. Because the truth had weight. And once it's fully seen, it's hard to ignore. You're making a mistake, she said finally, her voice quieter now, but still edged with resistance. Maybe, Daniel replied, but it's mine to make. She stared at him for another long second. Then her expression hardened. Completely. If there had been any softness left, it disappeared. Fine, she said. Just one word. But it carried everything. Frustration, anger, defiance. Then let's be clear, she continued. You either stand with me, or you stand here and let her tear everything apart. The ultimatum sat in the center of the room. Heavy, unavoidable. And for a moment I felt something shift inside me, not fear, not even anticipation, but a quiet understanding. Because this was the point where things become irreversible, where choices define direction. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, and when he spoke, his voice was steady. I'm not choosing sides, he said. Brittany let out a short, sharp laugh. That's exactly what you're doing. He shook his head. No, he said. I'm choosing accountability. That wasn't the answer she wanted, not even close. So that's it, she asked. You're just going to throw everything away. Daniel looked at her again. But this time, there was something else in his expression. Not just clarity, acceptance. No, he said quietly. I'm trying to stop pretending everything is fine when it isn't. That hit her harder than anything else, because it removed the illusion, the version of reality she had been holding on to. And once illusion breaks, there's nothing left to hide behind. She stepped back slightly, her arms still crossed, her posture rigid. This is unbelievable, she said again. But this time it didn't carry the same force, because the room had already shifted. The truth had already landed, and no amount of disbelief could undo that. I stood slowly then, not to interrupt, not to take control, but to close something that had been left open for too long. Daniel, I said gently. He turned toward me. Yes, I'm not asking you to choose between your wife and your mother, I said. His shoulders relaxed just slightly. But I am asking you to choose who you are? I continued. That landed, deeper than anything else, because identity is harder to avoid than loyalty. I can't rebuild trust overnight, I added, and I won't pretend this didn't happen. He nodded. I understand. And I'm not closing the door, I said. But I am stepping back. That was the boundary. Clear, firm, necessary. He nodded again, this time more slowly. I deserve that, he said. There was no argument, no defense, just acceptance. And that was new. Brittany didn't speak again. Not then. Not as the room slowly began to shift back into motion, people standing, gathering their things, conversations starting in low, uncertain tones. But as she moved toward the door, she paused for just a moment, turned back, and looked at me. Not with warmth, not with apology, but with something unresolved, something unfinished. Because people like Brittany don't see endings the same way. They see interruptions, setbacks, things to be corrected. But this wasn't that. This was a line, and I had drawn it, clearly, finally. And for the first time in a very long while, I didn't feel uncertain about where I stood. After that night, the house felt different. Not quieter, not emptier, just honest. For years, I had filled these rooms with effort, trying to keep everything balanced, connected, whole. Now, for the first time, I let the silence exist without trying to fix it. And in that silence, something unexpected happened. I felt lighter, not because everything was resolved, but because I was no longer carrying what wasn't mine. The next morning, I woke early, as I always did. The sunlight slipped gently through the curtains, settling across the hardwood floor in familiar patterns. For a moment, I lay there still, listening. Not for footsteps, not for voices, just stillness. And I realized something important. Peace doesn't always come from having people around you. Sometimes it comes from knowing exactly who belongs in your life and who doesn't. I got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. The same table where Brittany had once sat with her laptop, guiding me through just a quick login. The same table where I had said yes again and again without question. Now I opened my laptop and began making changes. Not emotional ones, structural ones. Every account was reviewed again, every access point removed, every setting adjusted. I contacted my bank first, then my investment advisor, calmly, clearly. No drama, no explanation beyond what was necessary. Please remove any secondary access that is not under my direct authorization, I said. They didn't question it, they just acted. Because in the world I had once worked in, clarity gets results. By midday, everything was locked down. Completely. Secure, final. It wasn't about punishment, it was about ownership. And for the first time in a long while, everything I had built was fully mine again. That afternoon, Margaret called. I reviewed the final documents, she said. Everything is in place. Good, I replied. There's one more step, she added. I assumed there would be. She paused briefly. Your will? She said. We need to finalize distribution. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Because this part carried weight. Tell me what you're thinking, she said. I looked out the window for a moment, watching the trees sway gently in the afternoon breeze. Not rushing. Because decisions like this shouldn't be rushed. I'm not removing Daniel completely, I said finally. Margaret didn't respond immediately. She waited, as she always did. But I am restructuring everything, I continued. Significantly. How so? She asked. Lily, I said, just her name, and everything behind it. I want her future protected, I added. Not controlled, not influenced, protected. Margaret nodded, even though I couldn't see her. That can be arranged, she said. A trust with independent oversight. Yes, I replied. That's exactly what I want. And Daniel, she asked. I paused again, because this wasn't just legal. It was personal. He'll still receive something, I said, but not control, not authority, and not without accountability. Margaret's voice softened slightly. That's a balanced decision, she said. No, I replied quietly. It's a clear one, because balance implies compromise. And this wasn't compromise. It was clarity. We finalized everything by the end of the call. When I hung up, I didn't feel relief. I felt certainty. And that was better. 2 days later, Brittany showed up, unannounced. Of course. I saw her car pull into the driveway from the kitchen window. For a moment, I considered not answering the door. But I didn't, because avoidance doesn't create boundaries. Clarity does. When I opened the door, she stood there composed, but not the same. There was no bright smile, no practiced warmth, just something more controlled. I need to talk to you, she said. Not can we talk. Not, do you have a moment? Just need. I stepped aside. Come in. She walked in slowly, her eyes scanning the room again, just like Becca had, but for a different reason. Becca had been searching for connection. Brittany was assessing, calculating. We stood in the living room. Neither of us sat. "I think things got out of hand the other night," she said. I didn't respond, because I wanted her to continue. To be clear, she added, "I never intended to hurt you." There it was. The careful phrasing, the distance, intent, instead of impact. "I understand that," I said calmly. She blinked slightly. Maybe she expected resistance or anger. I also think she continued that this has been misinterpreted. What we were trying to do was practical, responsible. I met her gaze. "And what you said I asked," she hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, "was taken out of context," she replied. "Of course. Still. Even now." I nodded slowly. "Then let's not talk about context," I said. "Let's talk about actions." Her posture shifted slightly, more guarded now. "What actions?" she asked. I stepped closer, not aggressively, but with intention. "You attempted to access my financial information," I said. "You initiated a report questioning my capacity, and you discussed controlling my assets before ever speaking to me directly." Each word was steady, measured, true. "That's not concern," I added. "That's strategy." Her expression tightened. "You're making this sound malicious," she said. "I'm describing what happened," I replied. The difference mattered. Silence stretched between us. Then she tried a different approach. "We're family," she said. And there it was. The word that used to soften everything. The word that used to make me bend, but not anymore. "Family doesn't remove boundaries," I said quietly. "It makes them necessary." That landed, because it wasn't emotional. It was absolute. She exhaled slowly. "So what now?" she asked. I didn't hesitate. "Now, things change." Her eyes sharpened. "How?" "No more financial involvement," I said. "No more access. No more assumptions about my role in your life." Her jaw tightened. "And Daniel?" she asked. "He has his own choices to make," I replied. "And you'll just cut us off," she pressed. "I'm not cutting anyone off," I said. "I'm stepping back." The distinction mattered, but I wasn't sure she understood it or accepted it. "You're overreacting," she said again, not as strongly as before, but still holding on to it. "No," I replied softly. "I'm responding appropriately." Another silence, longer this time, because there wasn't much left to argue, not without denying reality entirely. She looked at me then, really looked, and for a brief moment, something flickered. Not apology, not quite, but something close to realization. Then it disappeared, because recognition doesn't always lead to change. Sometimes it just leads to resistance. "Fine," she said finally, just like before, but quieter now, less certain. She turned toward the door, paused, then spoke again without turning around. "This isn't over." I didn't respond, because she was right. It wasn't, but not in the way she thought. She left a moment later, the door closing behind her with a soft, final click. I stood there for a while after she was gone, not replaying the conversation, not questioning myself, just standing, grounded, because something had shifted, not just in them, in me. And this time, I wasn't going to give that ground back. The house was quiet again after Brittany left, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet it had been before all of this began. This silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I walked back into the living room. Slowly, my steps unhurried my thoughts, no longer racing ahead of me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to anticipate what someone else might do next. I was simply present. I made myself a cup of tea, the same way I had done on countless mornings before, carefully, deliberately. The familiar routine grounded me in a way that no amount of conversation ever could, because routines don't betray you. People sometimes do. I carried the cup to the window and stood there looking out at the yard, Thomas and I had once spent weekends tending together. The flowers were beginning to bloom again, soft colors pushing through the soil, steady and patient. Healing, I realized, doesn't happen all at once. It happens quietly, gradually, like that. 3 days passed before I heard from Daniel. The message came in the evening. Not a call, not a sudden appearance at my door. A message. Mom, can we talk? I stared at it for a long moment, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I understood something now that I hadn't before. Access to me was no longer automatic. I set the phone down, finished my tea, let the moment exist without rushing to respond. An hour later, I picked it up again. You can come by tomorrow afternoon, I typed. Nothing more. No invitation. No warmth layered into the words. Just clarity. He arrived exactly on time. Alone. That mattered. When I opened the door, he stood there with his hands in his pockets, his posture slightly uncertain, like he wasn't entirely sure he was still welcome. Hi, Mom, he said quietly. Hi, I replied. I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, glancing around the house like he hadn't really seen it in years. And maybe he hadn't. Not like this. Not without assumptions. We sat in the living room, the same place where so many conversations had happened. But this one felt different, because there was nothing left to hide. I've been thinking a lot, he said after a moment. I nodded. I figured you might. He let out a small breath. I didn't realize how far things had gone, he said. Not really. I told myself it wasn't a big deal, that Brittany was just being cautious. I didn't interrupt, because explanations aren't the same as accountability, but I see it now. He continued, and I see what I allowed. That was closer. Not perfect, but closer. I should have defended you, he said. I should have shut it down the moment it started. Yes, I replied simply. He nodded, accepting that. I was afraid, he admitted, of what I asked. Of conflict, he said. Of pushing back. Of losing my marriage. I studied him for a moment, because fear can explain behavior, but it doesn't excuse it. And what did you lose? Instead, I asked. He looked down. You, he said quietly. The words sat between us. Heavy, honest. I didn't respond immediately, because this wasn't about making him feel better. It was about making him understand. You didn't lose me, I said finally, but you changed something between us. He nodded slowly. I know. Silence settled again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was real. What happens now? He asked. I leaned back slightly, considering the question, because the answer mattered, not just for him, for me. Now I said we rebuild, or we don't. He looked up. How, he asked. Not with words, I replied. With actions. He nodded again. I can do that. I held his gaze. Consistently, I added, not when it's easy, not when it's convenient, but when it's difficult. He swallowed. I understand. Do you? I asked gently. Because understanding isn't something you declare. It's something you demonstrate. I think I'm starting to, he said. That was honest. And honesty matters. I'm not going back to the way things were, I said. That version of me doesn't exist anymore. He nodded. I don't expect you to, he replied. Good, I said. Because expectations needed to be reset. I will have a relationship with you. I continued. But it will have boundaries. What kind of boundaries? He asked. No financial involvement, I said. No assumptions about access to my life, my decisions, or my resources. He didn't argue. Okay, he said. And one more thing, I added. He waited. If you want to be part of my life, you don't stay silent when I'm being disrespected. That landed. Deep. I won't, he said. Not defensively, not quickly, but with intention. And that mattered. We sat there for a while longer, talking not about the conflict, but about smaller things. Lily, work, life. It wasn't the same as before, but it wasn't broken either. It was different. And different, I was learning, doesn't always mean worse. Sometimes it just means real. After he left, I walked him to the door. He paused before stepping outside. "I'm sorry," he said again. I nodded. "I know," I replied. And this time, I meant it. Not because the apology fixed everything, but because it was part of something that might over time. When the door closed, I didn't feel the need to sit down and process. I didn't feel overwhelmed or uncertain. I felt steady. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to define my place in this family. I had already done that myself. That evening, as I sat in my chair with a book in my lap, my phone buzzed softly beside me. A message from the family group chat. For a moment, I just looked at it, because that space, that digital thread of conversations, had once held something that hurt more than I expected. I picked up the phone, opened the message, and there it was, a simple text from Lily. "Grandma, I love you. Mom says we're not coming over as much, but I still want to see you. You're the best." I read it once, then again, and something inside me softened. Not weakened, just softened. Because love, real love, doesn't get erased by someone else's agenda. It doesn't disappear because of manipulation or control. It finds its way through, quietly, honestly. I typed back, "I love you too, sweetheart. Anytime you want to see me, my door is always open." I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. The house was quiet again, but this time, it felt like peace. Not the kind that comes from avoiding conflict, but the kind that comes from facing it, from standing in truth, from choosing yourself without closing your heart completely. And for the first time in a very long while, I knew exactly where I stood. Not as someone useful, not as someone overlooked, but as someone whole. And that was more than enough. Sometimes the most painful moments in life don't come from strangers. They come from the people we trust the most. But pain, when faced honestly, has a way of revealing truth. And truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is where real strength begins. For years, I believed that love meant giving endlessly without question. That being needed was the same as being valued, but I learned something different. Being needed is not the same as being respected, and being kind should never mean being taken for granted. Boundaries are not walls. They are lines that protect your dignity, your peace, and your identity. And it's never too late to draw them. If you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or quietly disrespected by your own family, I want you to know this: you are not invisible, you are not replaceable, and you are never useless. Sometimes reclaiming your life doesn't mean walking away, it means standing still clearly and refusing to be treated as anything less than what you are. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to set boundaries with someone close to you? Where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? If this story touched, you don't forget to like and subscribe. You're not alone, and your voice matters more than you think.